I am super thrilled to welcome Dr. Nilo Marino Recalde, who is currently at Oxford. Nilo, as you'll see, will present some of the big data the big data bioacoustics work he's done, learning about animal culture with a population of great tits in Wetham Woods. But his background is actually in visual arts and anthropology and biology, and he's fused that all now through this lens of sound to learn about animal communication in some pretty innovative ways. And so, yeah, we're all super eager to hear about the work you're doing, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end for some questions and discussion. And Nilo, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, hello everyone. Well, first of all, thanks Ben. Thanks so much for the introduction and inviting me to speak today. I don't particularly enjoy public speaking, but I'll do my best. Um, and yeah, no, I'm really excited to be here today. And I mean, obviously, I'm at home, but you know what I mean. And yeah, like you said, yeah, I'm Nilo. I'm a postdoc at the University of Oxford. And I'm going to be sharing some of the research that I've been working on lately, and then afterwards, hopefully, we can have a chat. That'll be really fun. But yeah, to start, let me give you a little bit of background on the research itself and how I ended up doing this. And this included becoming a biologist in kind of a roundabout way because I used to do, yeah, like you said, visual art stuff and never actually study any science subjects. So I had to learn to program from scratch during the pandemic. And in the process, I discovered that I actually really enjoy working with data and doing data visualization. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you can see it. Yeah, so during my undergrad, which was actually in anthropology, I got interested in animal cultural diversity, and I started thinking quite a bit about how cultures change, how they become more or less diverse, and in particular, how we can study that through an evolutionary lens. Um, and by the time I was finished with that, I was interested enough that I wrote a few research proposals, and I contacted labs to see if I could do some PhD work on it. And one of those ideas was to study birdsong. So I always liked birds, and I had come across this long-term population study of great tits in Wytham Woods here in the UK, and I thought it would be a great place to do the research, right? And incidentally, this is where researchers like John Krebs and Peter McGregor did some really, really fantastic work a few decades ago. So that was exciting to be in the same place as that. And yeah, anyways, Ben Sheldon, who is the person that runs both the White and Teeth study and a very nice lab, I need to say, he liked the idea and very kindly gave me the support to do it. And that became my PhD, and he supervised it. So I was, yeah, fascinated by birdsong, but in particular learned birdsong and how it changes, how diversity is, what determines that diversity, and those kinds of things. And obviously, a big part of the answer to those questions is what can be found in why birds sing or learn songs to begin with, and also on how this ability evolves across the tree of life. And while that's perfectly true, I personally find it super interesting to also look at external forces, more neutral processes, if you will. So what am I talking about here? I mean, things like population structure, things like demography, and other population processes that can potentially also shape songs and song diversity as well. And there's a good body of theory that says this should be the case, but I wanted to see if I could do some empirical work on this. This is interesting in terms of the science, but these learned traits actually are important. To study any of these, we need to know which songs the birds were singing, and also, and just as importantly, who was singing them, which birds were singing them. And the goal ultimately is to be able to identify individual birds and also to know something about them. Yeah. So the idea here is that you could pick a bird at random, so any bird like this one here, um, and answer different questions such as where were you born? Did you grow up nearby? Did you come from the other side of the population? Did you maybe come from outside of the boundaries of the woods? And then other questions like, are you young or are you an old bird? Or what kinds of songs are you singing? Are these songs shared with other birds? are your songs within, part of the top 40 hits, or are you into, I don't know, like maybe polka metal, or like a obscure thing like that? And to answer these questions, I needed two things, right? So I needed um, the kind of life history data that we collect as part of this long-term population study anyways, and also, of course, recordings of songs, which we didn't have. So the first step, of course, was to go out in the field and record those songs. And the good news here was that during the breeding season, great tits do this thing where they sing very close to their nest, at least for a few days anyways, and then they start doing that. So we could use automatic recorders, we could use IROs for these, and collect a sample size an order of magnitude larger than I would have been able to do otherwise if I was just running around with a microphone, which I also do, but you get smaller sample sizes. Other information data for sure, but smaller sample sizes. But then came the tricky part, which was analyzing and extracting all those songs. And yeah, when I wrote the proposal to do that work, I very, very naively, I realized now, assumed that there were already, methods that were ready for these that were easy to use, but I was very wrong. And I walked straight into what I felt, at least at the time, it was a bit of a trap. So yeah, dealing with tens of thousands of recordings made in the wild is definitely not easy. And yeah, for better or worse, this part of the project very quickly became the main part of the project. So today I'll be walking you through some of the methodological choices that we made, some of the issues that we ran into, and also how we work through them. But yeah, before I do any of that though, I want to talk a bit about the field work, because I think it's a really important part of these kinds of processes, and it's definitely the part that I enjoy the most. And it's often overlooked, maybe, especially these days, because the computational side of it has become really central, because it's complicated and it takes up a lot of our time. So yeah, for the uninitiated, then I'll tell you a little bit about grade tips, some trivia about them. I'll tell you a bit more about the study side as well, and also I'll show you some pictures, because everyone likes fieldwork pictures, I guess. And otherwise, I'm very boring, so at least you get to see some cool birds. But yeah, before I continue, let's actually go to the field side. Cool. So yeah, now we're inside the woods at dawn, sometime in April. That's a field of wild garlic that grows in the woods and smells really nice when you step on it. And yeah, the gray tits are just one among many birds that live here. Um, Yeah, so yeah, there's two main reasons why gray tits are used in long-term studies so often. First one, they're really abundant. So they're a very common bird across most of Eurasia. And second, they readily use nest boxes, right? So if you provide them with the right type of box in terms of the size and the design, they'll use those instead of natural cavities. Almost, all of them will prefer that. So that makes it much easier to monitor their life cycle because you know where they actually are. Finding them in holes and trees is much more difficult, right? And then, yeah, the breeding season for gray tits in the UK runs from March to June, more or less. And during this time, gray tits are socially monogamous and defend territories around their nests. So once they finish building their nest, the female will lay usually between 8 and 10 eggs or so, incubate them, and then the pair will feed their young until they're about 3 years of age. And at that point, the chicks, if they've made it that far, they will leave the nest and travel around with the parents for a few more weeks. They learn about the world and they become fully independent. Then between late spring and the autumn, fledglings will disperse and they form these mixed species flocks. And when they feed more like seeds and stuff like that during the winter. Then as the spring gets near again, the new birds will form pairs and they begin defending territory as well, where they'll try to breed for the first time themselves. So then the field site is called Whiteham Woods. It's near Oxford in the south of England. And it's one of the most researched pieces of woodland in the world, so we like to say. Pretty much every department here in the university has some research project going on there. And it's got semi-natural ancient woodland that dates back to the Ice Age. And there's some plantations from the 17th century and stuff from the 17th, secondary woodland. And yeah, loads of ash, hazel, oak, beech, sycamore, that kind of thing, hawthorn. Yeah, so that's this is an old geological map here, and I just really like this map, so I always include them on talks. The site itself covers those two hills that you can see in the middle there, and then the River Thames kind of wraps around it, and then flows through Oxford and then towards London. Again, the site sits on some Jurassic coral beds and some clay, and it also provides a nice view of the city of Oxford in the background because this area is really flat. And even though the hill is only 126 meters, I think you can see the landscape. But yeah, Wytham Woods is particularly well known for its long-term population studies. And the first one of these to be established, there's been many others afterwards, but the first one was established by David Lack in 1947. And it's a continuous monitoring effort of this great population. This is now led by Professor Ben Sheldon, that's Ben there. And there's a lot of very cool research still happening. Can you see that? Yeah. 77 years on, because 2 years ago we had the 75th anniversary, which was fun. But yeah, the site is big enough to host pretty sizable population. It's just under 400 hectares, which I'm told is over 400 American football fields. I don't know what either of those things mean really, but it's still manageable enough to be able to check the nest boxes. It does a team of people like the one you see there every year, but it's doable. And it's also close to Oxford, which means that after long days, maybe after working for 15 hours, you can still go home and shower and remove those pesky ticks and get some sleep, etc. But yeah, we collected data in the breeding seasons of 2020, 2021, and 2022, started in late March and until June. And as I said earlier, these birds defend territories around their nesting site. And when the female is getting ready to lay eggs, the male then starts singing in the mornings close to it. So the male usually sleeps somewhere else, so roosts maybe in a natural cavity, sometimes even in another nest box if there any are empty. And then before the female starts going about her day, he'll sing these kind of dawn songs, quite close to the nest box, like I said. And then, the male perches somewhere nearby, moves around a bit, sings profusely often. And this serenade can last anywhere from a few minutes to half an hour and varies a lot from day to day and across the season and between years and with weather. And the good thing, though, is that if you place a recorder close enough, you have a good chance of capturing some decent audio of the male song. So let me play a couple of those for you. Great tits happen to be one of the most common birds, and everyone recognizes the song, I think. But let me. There you go. So yeah, this is a little site that I made for the dataset, and it's got some, just so you get an idea of the kind of diversity that you get with them. They're all very simple, very repetitive like this. Those are just some different ones. And here I have the longest I've ever recorded, which is pretty impressive in terms of how consistent it is. It's like 25 seconds, I think, or something like that. So yeah, that's pretty impressive. I'm kind of exhausted just by hearing it. But yeah, back to the presentation. There you go. So yeah, like I said, that was a website that I put together to gather some research for dataset and some examples and whatnot. but yeah, we were using 60 audio moth recorders, and I'm sure everyone's familiar with audio moth. They're fantastic. But there's hundreds of nests, so it wasn't really practical to have one per nest. So instead, every day we had to move 20 recorders around, which meant fetching 20 recorders in the morning, copying the data, swapping batteries if that was needed, and then going back to the field to place them at new nests. Which, yeah, it's slightly mad perhaps, and can quickly descend into chaos. So to make things easier, I wrote a command line program that would take information from field workers, so these uploaded when people do their kind of monitoring rounds, and use this data to plan where and when to place new acoustic logs, because if I had to do that in real time. So these run at the end of every day, and it turned out to be very useful, extensible almost. So yeah, fairly simple thing, but the kinds of things that make your life easier. Which not only always happens, because often, yeah, you try to automate things and you end up just spending more time really. But yeah, when we thought we had a new pair of birds, we would place a recorder on the trunk of the same tree as the nest, or in a nearby tree, usually no more than 5 meters apart or so. And that's because the focal bird tends to stay quite close to the nest, so within 10 or 50 meters, there's variation. But we took lots of extra steps just in case to verify that we weren't just recording an old bird. But you can read more about it in the paper, and we publish on these, etc. If you're interested. But yeah, at this point, I really need to mention and say a big thank you to the folks who helped me in the field, because I was new to all of these and always tired because it take a lot of effort, especially Andreas and Dia, who you can see there sitting at the recorder, and also Luan Pichot and Antoine Vance, who are two absolutely amazing master's students who did the projects with me. Yeah, I think they didn't completely hate this whole thing, because they're both doing acoustic stuff now, I think. But yeah, one advantage of not always being present in the field is that we could get a really good idea of what was happening around the nest. And this is something that's really fun about kind of passive monitoring. So we recorded not just the males, but also instances of female song, as well as interactions between males and females, which is something that has been described in previous work by other people. But yeah, none of this was the focus of our research, although it's fascinating. To keep it simple, we just focus on the kind of uninterrupted bouts of song that were always part of the male's dawn song, right? Which is only really a few days around when the female starts laying the eggs. Okay, so that's Fieldwork. That's the songs collected now, and also lots of work summarized in a few minutes. But then there's the rest of the data that I need for the kind of work that I was trying to do. And this involved monitoring nests, from the time the birds bring the first bits of moss to a nest box to the time the last of the chicks fledges. And as I said, this part is done by a large team of people that has been doing this for decades, and I was just about a small kind of part in that whole machinery. Every year usually takes around 8 people. And they go around counting eggs and trying to catch the parents, ringing the chicks, and so on. And it's a lot of work, but it's what makes this kind of science possible. And because the more you do something like that, the more valuable the whole thing becomes. But yeah, I'll show you some more pictures from the field, so you get their idea. That's me with the kind of the usual guys that you need to try to catch a bird. Then ringing a parent or a chick, and there's a lot of fun. You get to get beaten by lots of insects, and also to spend a lot of time out in the field. Then that's the kind of vehicular side of it. That's literally one day that is snowed, so it doesn't really snow that much, but it looks pretty when it does. And then there's my old rusty and not very trusty van that I did field work with for the first couple of years, and then the accidents that you have. And then those are some babies. Those are the 3 most common species that we would find in the nest boxes. So that's from left to right: blue-tip chick, gray-tip chick, and then a marsh-tit. And marsh-tits in particular are very cute, I think. So yeah, it's really fun to get to do that part as well. And this is what the poor parents end up looking like at the end of the season after having fed thousands and thousands and thousands of caterpillars to the babies. But yeah, also field workers kind of end up looking like this a bit when towards the end of it. But yeah, well, they sometimes they recover anyway. So some of them do. Short list after all. But yeah, okay, I'm going to talk a bit about the data set that we collected. So after a few years of field work and even more time staring at the computer screen, really, we ended up with this nice data set, and I'm going to give you a glimpse of it. And yeah, we collected over 21,000 hours of sound from more than 700 nests. And once the dataset was fully annotated, we ended up with more than 1 million individual nodes, which for this kind of dataset of like really targeted population, I think I felt was good. So these came from more than 100,000 songs from hundreds of birds. This includes around 250 individuals that we managed to ID reliably. Some of them over multiple years, which obviously is nice because it allows you to look at repeatability of things and test models in a way that you couldn't otherwise. And yeah, the spatial coverage as well was pretty good. Yeah, so because White and Woods has this weird shape, and yeah, so density is kind of patchy, so we managed to track that really well. I was just thinking that I've made so many maps of these place. I don't think I'll ever will make as many maps of any other place ever again. It's kind of weird. I know the shape. I could draw it just from memory. But yeah, anyways, I digress. The information we collected then includes data on things like breeding attempts, such as time and location, size of the clutch, and also the number of fledglings. And we also recorded the age of each bird, basic morphological traits like tarsus, length, body mass, that kind of thing. And then for birds that were born within the population, which was around 40% of the total, with variation, we also documented details like their birthplace, natal dispersal distance, and who their mother was and who their social father was. And yeah, also to go to with the recordings, like you see in that figure there, we prepared very extensive metadata, so including things like song duration, onset, offset times, song type labels, and also the time of the day of the recording, because obviously that's very important. And yeah, we also recorded information like the first song of the day and some pre-calculated embeddings that we got from a metric learning model I trained that I'll talk to you more about later. Yeah, so that website that I was showing you earlier with the songs just is like a little repository of all the, the code, the data, and the documentation to go with it. So now let me show you a summary of yeah, so it's a summary of the vocal activity of the birds across the season. And this is just kind of an illustration to look at one of the many things that one can look at. It's not scientifically, it's not that interesting. It's not like some in-depth analysis, but gives you a good idea of kind of the data set. So here along the longest axis there, you can see how vocal activity ramps up really quickly at first across the entire population, this is for the entire population, and then decreases more slowly towards the right here, which corresponds to the end of May, so kind of into the year. And then if you look at those dotted and solid lines that kind of cross the plane diagonally like that, those mark the peak in kind of daily song activity, right? So if you look at where sunrise is, and that's a gradient from night to day on the kind of lower plane, you see that the peak in activity tracks it perfectly, which is something that we know that to do. But it's really cool to see how kind of precisely they do that, always from like 20 minutes before sunrise. And yeah, I was talking a bit like a salesman just a second ago. I realized, but I was genuinely excited to share all this data because I have a few specific questions that I want to explore with it myself. But I think that is a valuable resource for any of the researchers to explore quite a wide range of scientific questions. So like repeatability of and stability of some traits and links between vocal performance and fitness, timing of some production and things like this, right? And I think it could be especially useful for researchers who want to answer these kinds of questions, but maybe don't have the time or funding to spend 3 years in the field, student projects, that kind of thing, or people doing meta-analytical stuff. And yeah, also I'm just a big fan of open software and open data and stuff. I think that's something that is important if we actually want to do science, and also be nice and kind about it, because I've had many times in my still very, very short career, obviously, that when I see something interesting in a paper, or maybe something that I think could be useful for me or someone else, I would try to find data or code or something, and just to find one of these funny resource availability statements, and a little bit of Google gatekeeping as well. So yeah, publishing these data set and also software always a kind of a priority for me, because I find that an interesting part of the process as well, honestly. Yeah, okay, so I'm gonna switch gears and talk a bit about computational methods, because I am told this audience likes to chat about methods, so here we go. Where am I? Yeah, so like I mentioned, we collected quite a lot of data, and to put that into perspective, if you were to play the data we collect continuously in real time, it would take over 2 years to listen to it. And that's something that is becoming increasingly common. I mean, this is a small data set compared to what lots of people are doing with, remote kind of acoustic monitoring. And there's a lot happening in those recordings. There's a whole symphony of birds and deer barks and very loud pheasants that are everywhere in the UK. And a ton of anthropogenic nonsense, really. But for the project, we just were focused on the songs of great kids. This is what a rated song looks like. Just kind of very stereotypical one. And those are the terms that we use for the different parts, because everyone uses like different terms. So those are mine, not mine. People that have done research on greatest before me. And they have a fairly simple song structure, like I said, and they just repeat a few sequences of notes, 2, 3, 4, 5 most notes in a loop. Then notes are the smallest discrete sound elements defined by amplitude. And then we call these sequences of notes syllables, and syllable types and song types in greatest are really the same because they just repeat syllables. And apropos of nothing, here's a slow down song, because I feel like talking about acoustics is nothing without one, and this is what they sound like. Really slow them down. Cool. So yeah, the first challenge then was to find those down songs, but that wasn't too difficult because they're very clearly distinguishable. They're just much louder than anything else. So in 1 hour long recordings, you can easily find the big blocks of song. Then I segmented the audio into individual songs, and initially I had to do this manually because we didn't have a pre-existing training data set, and I wouldn't have known how to do it really at the time. But this process can be, and I have since automated, and that makes it much faster. Then once I had segmented these songs, I wanted to further break them into individual notes. Yeah, which is not always necessary, but it does make some analysis possible if you have this detailed information. So I experimented with amplitude-based methods, which worked well enough for the kind of simple songs that this created string. Of course, this is not the case for lots of other species, maybe even most species. What I did is I adapted existing algorithms to handle noise a little bit better, because my recordings were quite noisy, right? Because they're from the field, and I implemented some morphological transformations and denoising and whatnot, and this gave me a kind of an accurate way to segment individual nodes. So once I had this really big number of semantic nodes, like I said, over 1,100,000, something like that, I moved on to classifying them into syllables or song types. I didn't want to do this for all birds at once, though, because the song kind of type labels don't mean much at that scale. So I wanted to label each repertoire separately, because I think the at least level of description is where song type categories really make sense. The reason is that the song types within birds, they're quite different from one another. So they're very clearly categorically different. And I tried automating these using dimensionality reduction and clustering algorithms, but obviously I ran into lots of issues with this, because sometimes clusters of the same song types were split due to differences in audio quality, background noises, small changes in performance, but not really because of any intrinsically interesting patterns in the data. This is a common issue with these kinds of methods, obviously. One that is not perhaps slightly overlooked. It's only one that you only notice if you're really familiar with your data, right? Like these things can find structure where there is none. But yeah, eventually I realized that the Brace approach was to use a human in the loop type of system. And to do this, I would generate an embedding that separated the song types well, and then I would do a few passes of automated clustering in a way that oversplit the data, very obviously oversplit, but this time on purpose. And with these embeddings and those labels at hand, then I built an interactive tool to correct the automatically assigned cluster labels, which is a process that ended up saving me a huge amount of time. And I was able to do in a few hours, the work that would have taken me months probably. But yeah, I tried to optimize the code for the entire process to be reasonably efficient. So using things like just-in-time compiling and making it compatible with distributed systems and GPUs and that kind of thing were possible, not always possible. But yeah, I released this a while ago as a Python library, and it's been useful to a few people. So yeah, I'm really happy that that's the case. But yeah, it was a good learning experience for me. At this point, yeah, I should say that this was all a bit of a challenge for me because, especially at the beginning, because I was just out of undergrad and the only training in stats or data analysis I ever got was really just using SPSS. So they were about to transition into teaching R, but they hadn't yet. And it was quite a steep learning curve for me, but I'm not really complaining though, because like we say in Spanish, sarna con gusto no pica. But yeah, this is a visualization of trajectories of songs across a possible representation of the acoustic space. And this is inspired by work by Kyle MacDonald on projections of window spectrograms of Hump of Whale song, just because it looks really pretty. Yeah. So yeah, I'm just gonna have this as a background while I talk, which, like I said, looks pretty. But yeah, when it comes to characterizing songs, I needed two things, right? I needed the ability to compare how similar any two songs were, and also some categorical way of determining how many different song types there were in an area, because this is required by some analysis. And one challenge in the process, and this is an issue for both of these kind of goals, the continuous and the discrete, is that it can be affected by slight changes in performance. So background noise changes to do with the order of notes, for example. So if a bird starts singing from a different point in the song, or if the recording itself misses the start, for example, in something like, you could instead record something like, and then depending on the kind of method that you're using, think that is something else altogether. So I tried a bunch of common methods of extracting and combining different spectral and temporal features, but these usually weren't robust enough or weren't fast enough for my purposes and some ideas that I wanted to test further on. So I turned to computer vision instead. And since we needed labels to train the model, and as I said, the only biologically meaningful ones were song types within repertoires, I thought the way to go would be to do what's called weakly supervised metric learning, where very broadly, the goal is to learn a distance metric, right? In this case, a Euclidean metric, distance array that puts positive pairs or pairs of data points that are similar close together and negative pairs that are different far away. So I used the vision transformer model, and I fine-tuned it using a triplet loss function. which just roughly works by comparing three examples: an anchor, main song, a positive or a similar song, and a negative kind of example. And the idea is to pull apart the ones that are different, bring the ones that are close together close. And very important as well was really extensive data augmentation. So introducing lots of variation in the data of the kind that you might encounter in real data. So having to do with background noise especially. And this made the model much more robust to these differences that you find across seasons, for example, and made it less susceptible to background noise, which is really important. Now, once I trained and validated the model on a different subset of data, I used it as a feature structure to calculate feature vectors for all the songs. And then this allowed me to very efficiently calculate statistics based on k-nearest neighbors and do very fast queries of the data set and that sort of thing. Yeah. But yeah, it turned out that the model was almost unreasonably good at distinguishing songs. And of course, the first thing that one needs to do if that happens is to think that it's all gone wrong. That is, there's been data leakage or the model is just learning some correlated feature like background noise or something like that. But none of that was the case at all. And yeah, we immediately realized that you could exploit that you could use a model to re-identify individual birds from their songs alone, right? So we tested it, and sure enough, even though the model was trained on songs from single years, it could still reliably identify the same bird across different years with really tiny false positive rates, less than 0.5%. And this across hundreds of birds that are singing will often seem like very similar songs or the same song type. And most of these are birds that never really interact. So these are not particularly driven by pressure to be very different to the others. And yeah, as a side note, this is why, in my opinion, maybe unsolicited, the only reasonable way to study individual identity and vocalization is to do behavioral experiments and stuff, because whether one or another model can tell them apart doesn't mean much, because it depends on how good the model is and how good the data are more than anything, because I mean, all individuals are different in one way, and you can probably pick that up if your model is good enough. But yeah, what you see in this graphic here is a UMA projection of the resulting space. A UMA is a nonlinear dimensionality reduction algorithm. What you have here is a 2D projection of the much higher dimensional data set. This visualization is just that, it's a visualization. You should never really, you should never read too much into it. But it's just kind of a useful way to visualize what's happening. Makes it a bit more intuitive perhaps. And then yeah, each little cluster here is typically made up of instances of the same song type sung by the same bird. And then if we query the model by taking songs and then asking which songs are similar to that one, well, we can do lots of fun stuff, right? And this opens up cool possibilities for passive acoustic monitoring of individuals. And I haven't had much time to play around with these. I know a lot of other people are working on this stuff like this, and I think there's going to be really cool work done on this kind of thing. But yeah, so for example, some birds may fail in their first breeding attempt, but we still record the songs, but don't get to physically ID them. That's happened a few times. But later we might ID them during the second nesting attempt where they are successful. So then this allows you, for example, to match those birds with the first by the song, not the birds, but the male in this case, which is the one that we had more songs for. But doing this, doing something along these lines, we've been able to increase our sample size in some downstream analysis by quite a few birds, which is really great. And that's just a couple of prosaic examples, but I think it's it's a fun thing to explore more. Cool. So I'm gonna switch gears again, and I'm gonna talk about some results that we got recently, and I'll be finishing with this. I've mentioned cultures a couple of times now, but I've not really defined what I mean by this. So for those who might not be familiar, when animals learn behavior socially, these behaviors can sometimes spread and persist over time, and we call these cultures, right? So this is a very basic definition, but I think hopefully good enough for our purposes here. These animal cultures, they're not static, and they change, and they're both neutral and selective processes and mechanisms that influence the frequency of these cultural traits. And this leads to what we call cultural evolution, in analogy with molecular evolution, which can happen over short periods or can unfold over much longer time scales. And there's example of both in the animal kind of in the animal world. The question of how cultures arise, how stable they are, and how they change is one that I really find fascinating, right? So some of the methods that people are coming up with and the stuff I've been chatting to you about, these things are starting to make it possible to do the research on these and at a much larger scale that might make more insights possible. But yeah, in studying cultures, there's been a lot of research on social learning strategies and biases. So thinking of things like frequency dependence, tutor biases, biases for some types of content, and how the topology of social networks influences how the traits spread along it, etc. But the theory also predicts that population processes, so things like dispersal, migration, mortality, age structure, these are all things that we can broadly and maybe a bit laxly call demographic factors. They can all have a big impact on cultural change and on cultural diversity. And yeah, studying this empirically, maybe it's not particularly easy, but it is important. You need this, yeah, you need to pair individual level information about things like song repertoires with the characteristics of both individuals and the population as a whole. Cool. So it took us a while to get to this point. Well, mostly me, but what we did was to then characterize the demographic variation across the population, focusing on local neighborhoods, because we know there are there's a spatial heterogeneity. There are differences across the population. So we created a continuous kind of windowed estimate of demographic properties in local areas. So yeah, in this plot here, you can see some of the variables that we looked at. So for example, we measured natal dispersal, like I was saying. So that's how far birds move from where they were born. And you can see there's quite a range. Some birds don't disperse much at all, they stay put, whereas others move up to 1.5 kilometers and beyond. But a typical bird ends up holding a territory around 600 meters away from where it was born. Then moving to immigrations on the top right, a typical neighborhood has around 40% of its population that has come from outside of the population. So these are birds that were not ringed as chicks in the nest. And there's a long tail towards kind of more immigration in the neighborhoods. Then we also looked at age distribution, which is that kind of truncated Gaussian there, which centers around the reproductive lifespan of the bird, which is around 1.9 years. And then finally, we measure turnover rates, which are generally quite high because these birds are short-lived. They vary from around 25% to nearly 100. This really depends on the area and depends on the year. And yeah, then we turn to the cultural outcomes. So we looked at cultural diversity. So this is how many different songs were being sung in a given area. And we also looked at how unique those songs were by looking at how prevalent they were in the wider population. And this gives you an idea of kind of a structure in space. And then finally, we measured cultural turnover, which is the same as with individual turnover, but with culture, like how the proportion of songs that change from one year to the next. And yeah, with these data at hand, we feed a range of models, including spatial explicit and network-based models of song sharing, of song diversity, and of song turnover. And what we found is that there is variation across cultural traits, across space and over time. Not only that, but the variation really isn't random. And what's more, as the age difference between birds increases, the cultural similarity decreases, which is strong evidence of cultural change over time, which is exactly what you would expect, but it's nice to see it so clearly in the data there. And we also saw that cultural turnover wasn't randomly distributed across the population. There were very clear local differences, and in some areas, change was much slower than in others. But maybe even more interesting than these was that demographic variation, and these are the scale that we believe is quite important because it's the scale really at which the birds interact with one another and the scale at which they move around and kind of actually listen to the birds. This scale demographic variation was correlated with both the diversity and the pace of change of some culture. So, for example, if we look at the effect of dispersal, we see that neighborhoods where birds have dispersed over longer distances together, they tend to have songs that are a bit more mainstream, more common in the population, and this matches what we might expect from population genetics models. Obviously, the mechanism is very different, and simulations that don't suggest that the pattern is driven by the fact that birds that move more are better able to sample the acoustic space and which songs are popular, etc. Then looking at immigration, these are birds that we do not bring as chicks, like I said. We see that immigrant birds do not introduce new songs, instead they kind of adopt local ones, because they're mostly come as juveniles. But there is a difference though. Immigrant birds tend to have larger repertoires. It's interesting. We don't know exactly why, but it might reflect the pressures of moving and adapting to a different population or some filtering that's happening as part of that kind of going into a different population, because that requires longer distance dispersal than within the population. And yeah, we were also interested in whether age plays a role, because age structure is important for many population processes. And indeed, we found that neighborhoods with more older birds have higher cultural diversity and more culturally distinct, mostly because old birds, they're not incorporating new songs in the repertoire, we don't think. So they're a bit like kind of a time capsule of the songs that were there before. And yeah, I'm skipping over a lot of nuance here. But yeah, hopefully just to give you a glimpse of the results. We also see that individual turnover is a major driver of cultural turnover, as you might expect, because many song types disappear with the birds that sang them. Once you adjust for this statistically, though, it turns out that dispersal, immigration, and age structure, they also influence how quickly the collective song repertoire changes over time. So specifically when there's less mixing, that is less dispersal, less immigration, and therefore more population structure, cultural change slows down. The same happens when there are older birds. This all makes sense when you think about it, but I think it is exciting that we can detect these associations in a medium-sized population and over short distances and within relatively short time frames, because if you think about it, that's about 2 bird generations worth of change that we're looking at. Yeah, so wrapping up, I guess, yeah, so when it comes to those results I was showing, demographics does, as expected, play a role in the diversity and the pace of change in birdsong, at least at this local scale. And I think that's interesting, and it opens up many possibilities for looking at how these processes interact with all sorts of other factors, really. Maybe the first and most obvious one is to look at how these variation driven by these population processes feeds back into more commonly studied aspects, so like signaling and territory establishment, mate choice, reproductive success, etc. Right? Yeah, but honestly, the process of bringing them to of getting to this point, sorry, became almost as interesting, if not more, than any result, right? The whole journey, so collecting and publishing the data, learning how to write software, and this whole thing was a really big learning experience for me. Partly because when you don't know enough about something, which is always the case for me, and I guess for everyone, especially at the beginning, you often end up reinventing the wheel, but it's part of the process, and I'm happy that some of the stuff that I worked on is already helping other researchers, and it's just fun to chat about these things. And I really like Ben was saying earlier, before everyone started, in terms of how you arrive to things, and what I love about bioacoustics is that it really combines many things, right? So it combines biology, culture, data science, cognition, perception. It's a very long list of things, and they're all fascinating. So the fact that with the right tools we can pull out really rich, meaningful information from big amounts of acoustic data is I think really exciting. And combining field recordings with computational methods and individual level information can really give us new insights into animal culture. And it's really fun to mix traditional fieldwork, which I really enjoy, with kind of data analysis and new tools that are appearing. So yeah, the the next time you hear birds singing, um, remember that you're not just listening to an angry or a horny bird. You're eavesdropping on a very complex cultural process as well, right? And it's one that carries information about the history and the dynamics of entire populations. Um, and one that, if you think about it, we still don't know that much about. At least I don't. But yeah, thanks a lot for your attention. I sorry that I've gone on so long, and I'll be super happy to chat about anything at all now. Looking forward to it. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Nilo, thank you so much for that inspiring presentation. Hopefully you can see the hand emojis that are floating almost at the same pace as your credits screen. We've got some questions that are coming into our Q&A space. And so I think we can go through these, and then if anyone has, wow, the applauses are continuing to stream in. Good, I won't get distracted. So one question we have from, let's see, this was about the annotations from John. How did you annotate all of that data? Did someone go through everything and mark the onsets and offsets of the 100,000 plus songs, or was there an automated process for detecting those songs in the data set?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So that's something that I spent a lot of time thinking about. Mostly because I didn't have a lot of experience doing this before, like none really. So what I ended up doing was a combination of different things, right? So at first, as I was saying earlier, I manually found the kind of the song bouts, and then I mostly annotated the songs themselves, song chunks manually. Then everything kind of downstream of that, I automated. Then with kind of later data that I collected, because I had this data set of already segmented songs, I could automate that, using models for object detection and things like that, right? If the audio is of good enough quality and there's no nonsense in the background, then you could just do it based on amplitude, also for the songs. And if the kind of the distribution of silences, for example, is such that you can actually tell them apart and define them based on some heuristic. So it really depends on the species and the quality of the data. What I did is a combination of manual and automated.
Mhm. So the manual portion was annotating the songs.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So you annotated 100,000 songs manually.
I think so. I think yeah. So the songs themselves, I didn't annotate perfectly. So I didn't find like consonant or offset, just like general region, right?
Okay.
So I just kind of drew bounding boxes very loosely for chunks of them, right?
Okay. Got
Yeah.
it. Okay, next we have a few questions that are all about these visualizations that you presented. So some maybe take us through your process, and if you have any resources or suggestions for learning how to make graphics like the ones you've shared. This is sort of a big, broad question of how can we be more like you and create inspiring visualizations that,
And thanks for the nice words.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Um, this is a part of it that I enjoy a lot because I like visual stuff, and I would actually like to spend even more time and doing that. Um, the I don't think there's any kind of secret ways. I think learning how to use kind of vector kind of graphics software is important. So something like Inkscape or Illustrator that helps. I am a bit obsessed with trying to get the figures as close to the final result with code as I can. So I like to do more things programmatically. Um, So yeah, like trying to keep things basically kind of clean and tidy. I think that's important. And so I use ggplot a lot, like everyone else, and also matplotlib in Python. And yeah, try to sometimes I sketch what I want to do beforehand, and that helps. And then try to get as close to that as possible with code, so that if anything changes in kind of the pipeline or I rerun it, I don't have to spend an entire day in Illustrator like tweaking labels or something, right?
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, it's hard. It's hard to say. There's no like special process. I mean, I'm sure people that do this for a living and actually like know more about theory behind it could give you a good answer. In my case, it's just I just enjoy it, so I spend
Yeah,
more time on it than I probably should.
that's the truth. So,
Yeah,
and I think you have the code for some of your figures on your GitHub.
yeah, all of them. Yeah.
Yeah, so if people want to, open the hood and take a look at how you put those together, maybe Cameron can redrop the link to those in the chat. So Tiago Marquez,
Hmm.
he works a lot with density estimation, mostly in the marine realm, and so he is wondering, have you tried to use your data to estimate population size from PAM using a Q counting approach?
I have not. No, I haven't done that at all. Um, in our case, this data set is good for that as well because we also have a pretty decent estimate of population density, anyways, because we monitor the population using kind of traditional methods. Um, so yeah, that's something. Um, yeah. So yeah, I think that's something that is obviously there. I'm aware of it, but because it's not been something I've been doing work on, I just haven't spent time on it. Now the project I'm working on involves things that are closer to that, where kind of density becomes more important. So it's something I'm definitely going to be exploring more. And yeah, these uh, the fact that you can identify or re-identify individuals, especially for birds that have small repertoire sizes and fairly kind of consistent ones, means that if you have dense enough sampling, you can do some really cool stuff. Even with when you have kind of synchronized recordings or microphone arrays. Yeah. Anyway, don't know what to say.
Okay, so let's see. Are you okay to stay for a little bit longer?
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Okay, great.
If you're
So,
not sick and tired of me, I'm happy to.
oh, come on. So let's see. Vankur is wondering, if you trained the AI algorithm, I think that you used to generate embeddings, did you train that by scratch, or was that already a pre-trained algorithm that you were using?
Yeah, so I tried different things, and I ended up using a visual transformer because it gave me good results, and that's a model in particular that is not stable to stable enough to train on a data set like this. So I never even tried. I just started with kind of pre-trained weights from ImageNet, and then what I did is a fairly extensive fine tuning for this data set, and that worked wonders. So I never tried to you know train a model from scratch for the data set. But it's definitely something that, yeah, if I do more work along these lines, I would definitely explore.
Hmm.
Um, I think, yeah, sometimes with these kind of pre-trained models, and if you more or less know what you're doing when it comes to fine tuning, you can quite quickly get to something quite good, right? Especially um, as there are more kind of bigger models trained on birdsong and more like domain specific data, that's going to become more and more the case. Well, in
Right.
this case, it wasn't even trained on sound data. It was just yeah, kind of ImageNet data set.
Another question from Paul that I will add on to. So, well, the first is, I guess, one of amazement of just you're able to re-identify the same individuals over successive years. I had a question of how was it that the clusters, like in that UMAP visualization, they're not clustering by song type, they're clustered by individual. And so I was
Hmm.
wondering how you um, structured um, your modeling approach so that you didn't have things clustered by song type?
Yeah, so no, that's a really good question and something that I had to give quite a bit of thought because depending on what you want, yeah, like the embedded space should look different. Because the only kind of real ground truth that I had was these kind of song types within birds. And we know those are important for the birds themselves because they can tell one another apart, right? I thought that would be the best way to do it. So try to um, have a kind of a metric space that allows you to say, okay, well, we know for certain these all belong to the same individual, and then we can work from there to see which other individuals sing songs that are similar. So if you have really strong preconceived ideas about song types existing in the population because it's more categorical overall, then training on those kinds of labels will be good. In this case, it's just not a thing because variation is really continuous. So when
Mhm.
you do need to use this idea of a song type at the population level for some analysis, which I did, it becomes a bit more tricky and it becomes a bit more subjective, right? So I basically what I did is I started from those kind of similarity judgments by the model, and then I did some kind of further clustering to find this kind of typology of songs of song types, right, and find these kind of song families, and that works well. In that there is lots of kind of simple teacher type song that kind of clusters together, and then there's more like bizarre stuff that only one or two individuals sing. So it's like it's a hybrid thing where you start from the bottom up. It's something that worked in this case, but won't necessarily work in other cases, and it really depends on how variation is structured across the population. So,
Right.
um, yeah.
But in your case, like you had the one cluster plot where it
Hmm.
was that interactive program that you built in Python,
Mm, yeah.
but then you also had the plot that you showed later where it was different clusters represented different individuals. Um,
Yeah, most of the time. There's some that are because yeah, just to do the representation. So in that case, if you kind of divide it by individual, some classes actually have more than one. But yeah, there's like some correspondence.
okay. So because the differences in song was more continuous as opposed to like discrete categories, you still would be able to get those clusters based on individuals as opposed to
Yeah. So I mean, depending on the kind of where the target is of the training, you're maximizing kind of different things. So in that case, that model optimizes distance based on features that allow you to identify individuals, which
got
are
it.
not necessarily the same ones that allow you to say something interesting about variation across the population in kind of things that are learned, so to speak.
Got it. So they were different models. That makes sense. Cool. Paul also had a question about the um, areas around Witham Woods, the gaps, that weird uh,
Hmm.
plot of Witham Woods. So was that human dominated areas? What are the surroundings like?
Yeah. So Wytham Woods, it's kind of surrounded by lots of farmland. So there's a few smaller kind of copses and patches of woodland, but it's mostly just kind of arable land around it and a few farms. And then there's the river to one side and then the highway and the Oxford to another. So it is all kind of heavily kind of anthropized landscape. And yeah.
Um, okay, so Aditya has two questions. One, was did you look into any microclimatic variations within the woods as an association with the cultural factors in the data set? And then also, what about song sharing and the intensity of it in respect to territories held? More
Mhm.
like neighbors and strangers song similarity. So have you looked into either of those in your work?
Yeah. So the first one, I on purpose didn't go anywhere near. That I so we were actually collecting really precise um, uh, temperature data, for example, across the woods, and obviously that is going to have an influence on some culture and also like territory quality and all that. There's a interaction between ton of different factors, but here I very kind of explicitly limited myself to just looking at these patterns of song similarity and the kind of cultural side of it because yeah there would probably be things like repertoire size, where it interacts with territory quality, who gets to hold the territory there, these kinds of things, right? So some of the demographic variation, or a lot of it really, is probably explained by some of these other and underlying more basic features of the habitat, for example. And that is obviously massively interesting, and that's the kind of things that you need to look at to kind of close the circle where you look at all these different factors. But I limited the analysis just to this kind of cultural sphere, just to keep it kind of contained, because it can get really crazy really quickly. So yeah, those are also really interesting questions for sure. And the
Great.
other question, what was the other question? Okay.
It was the climatic variables, the microclimatic variables, and then the song
Yeah.
sharing.
Yeah, so song sharing decreases as a function of distance. Birds that are closer share more songs. And that's like the pattern that you'd expect. It's not like hugely strong because it's, you know, kind of mixing and etc. But yeah, birds that are closer tend to share more songs on average.
And let's do one final question from Raj. Oh, we have two. First, I guess, just practically, how often did you go and collect the data or change the batteries? I guess, yeah, and did you lose a lot of recorders over the course of the study?
Yeah, so I use 60 of them, always the same ones, on some enclosures that I built for them. And so the time when the birds are singing a lot, are really kind of tightly clustered around the first egg. So you really need to try to get there when they're finishing kind of lining the nest. And you usually get the most songs like 1 day or two before the first egg. These will vary by population probably, but 1 to 3 days after the first egg has been laid, it just goes down really quickly, right? So there's a really small window of opportunity, which meant that I tried, if I could, if I recorded enough songs, to just have recorders in place for 3 days at a time and then move them somewhere else. So which meant that every recorder I depended, but I had to fetch and move around every 3 days. Then batteries I changed every 2 sets of deployments, I think. And same with data. At the beginning, I was backing data up more often, but then at some point I said, oh, this is crazy. So I just trusted the technology.
Okay, and finally, let's end with Raj. He's wondering about PyCanto. That's the Python package that Nilo has put together, and how it compares with other sound analysis programs, like Sound Analysis Pro, other Python packages. Is there, I would say, if you could briefly explain the core functionalities of PyCanto, um, and potentially, what makes it unique or worth checking out. I think it's probably
Yeah,
a new tool for a lot of us.
yeah. So I think I mean it's just one more addition to what's out there. I mean it's something that I put together because it was really useful to me. But I think it's not like a general purpose tool that will be useful for everyone doing this kind of work, right? Um, for me, the main thing was to make sure that, and this is in contrast with all the software like the one you mentioned, uh, it was important for me to keep it, kind of reproducible and based on code, to just kind of have every step along the way kind of written down in kind of code or in a script. So I tried to just use kind of an open source libraries and keep it reproducible like that. So just in summary, basically what it allows you to do is to take some pre-segmented audio. So you need, some sort of just chunks of there's birdsong here. Allows you to create, kind of simple database like structure with that you can query, then segment. And again, this is based on amplitude, so that's going to be good for some species, but not good for lots of others. It also allows you to import, segmentation that you've done using machine learning models, for example. And then you can use this interactive app to, project the data and then correct or kind of relabel automatically assigned cluster labels, right? And that's the main thing that was really useful for me. How useful it is again depends on things like repertoire size, for example. Works very great for grade dates, whereas I have maybe up to like maybe few tens at most kind of syllable types. Anything more than that, or anything that is very noisy, or anything that where there's a huge amount of variation, not a lot of kind of stereotyped vocal behavior, then that makes it much harder, right? So being realistic about that. And then once you have that, it allows you to kind of plan and organize downstream analysis and export kind of the data and keep it tidy in a way that allows you to run extra analysis on it. So for example, I didn't implement like actual analysis or like feature extraction algorithms because everyone needs different things. And I personally don't not really like it when you can just click on a few boxes and get some data out and then do stuff with it. I think it's best to actually know what the thing is doing. So I use it for my research now, and I find it useful. And the idea behind publishing it is just that if other people find it useful or find some bits of it useful to build on it, well, that's great. I mean, if you look at the code, and it's also based on stuff other people have done, and that's how these things work, anyways, right? I'm not inventing anything particular.
Yeah, I would love to see how that works on something like humpback whales. And maybe
Yeah, I have no idea. I probably not very well because I really kind of out of the domain of what I was testing it with.
Okay, I see we've got one more question. We've answered all the ones in the Q&A. Looks like Thomas, do you wanna be the final person to ask a question? Feel free to unmute. Yep.
Yeah, I'm here. So first of all, Nilo, was absolutely fascinating talk. Thanks a lot from different perspective. That was really cool. And
Thank you.
and actually my question has already been answered before, so it's sort of we can stop here. Thanks a lot.
No, thank you.
In that case, Nilo, thanks so much again for joining us and inspiring us. I urge everyone to check out Nilo's papers, which I think they're open access. I'm quite sure about that. And then also his GitHubs. So in 2 weeks, we'll have our Halloween themed BioacousTalks, and that could be, thrilling stories from the field, maybe mysterious sounds that you've encountered in your recordings. If you have a story that comes to mind, please get in touch with me and Cameron. I'll put my email in the chat again. And yeah, it's about time we open up and just have a good community session. So please feel really encouraged to share your stories. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and until next time.
Thanks so much for having me. It's really fun. Thanks so much.